Thinking about self-publishing and don't know where to start? Join the Spa Girls each week for 30 minutes of honest advice, tips and resources. I'm Trudy J and I am here with Cheryl Phipps.
Hi there.
Wendy Valla.
Hello.
And Shah Barrett.
Hi.
And this week we have an awesome guest. We have Jayne Castel.
Yay.
Hi there, everyone.
Welcome, Jayne.
Hello.
Hi. Hello. Good to be
Now,
here.
Jayne, thank you. Sorry. Jayne is an awesome New Zealand author. We're so excited to have you on. It's really great.
Which makes her that bit's extra special, right?
Yeah, right. Like we love having the Kiwis on the show, to be fair. And she just gave a talk at our conference, which she managed to squeeze in before we got locked down, which was very exciting. And we just fell in love with you, Jayne. We think you're awesome. And so we decided to get you on the show and talk a little bit about how you've become successful basically as a self-published author. So I'm going to read your bio and then we will begin. Okay, so award-winning author Jayne Castel writes epic historical and fantasy romance. Her vibrant characters, richly researched historical settings, and action-packed adventure romance transports readers to forgotten times and imaginary worlds. Jayne is the author of a number of best-selling series. In love with all things Scottish, she writes romances set in both Dark Ages and medieval Scotland. When she's not writing, Jayne is reading and rereading her favourite authors, cooking Italian feasts, and going on long walks with her husband. She lives in New Zealand's beautiful South Island.
Yay!
And so you don't make Scottish medieval feasts like with haggis and...
No, I don't. No, even though I live in Dunedin, which is the Edinburgh of the South, and we do have haggis here occasionally, but no, haggis isn't really my thing.
I can't even imagine trying it. I'm just trying to make it.
Haven't you had haggis?
I've had it.
It's kind of a bit like a sausage.
It is.
When I had it wasn't bad.
It's just when you know what went into it. But then sausages are like that, aren't they?
Yeah. Sorry for the sausage talk this early in the day. So Jayne, well, let's start off. Let's right at the beginning and give us your origin story, how you got into writing and especially self-publishing. Go.
Well, it's obviously, like most writers, it's a long story because I started writing obviously when I was a kid, or not obviously, but a lot of us do. I used to write like stories and illustrate them like for ponies, I was pony mad. And so it was like, the day of the show, but I never got past like page 2. I used to get bored and like, I never actually got to the show. There'd be like brushing the pony and braiding the pony's hair, and that was it. So for years I wrote things and I never quite finished them. And then I wrote, in my mid-20s, I wrote this kind of big space opera thing, which I finished, but never saw the light of day because I was too embarrassed to show it to anybody. And then I subsequently lost the manuscript in many moves. I don't know what I did with it, which is probably as well.
Oh, no.
But it was kind of, it was my first thing that I finished. But then I thought, well, okay, I finished one, I can write another. And so I ended up writing an epic fantasy. Which this was before, so this was in 2006, 2007, I think. This was before Kindle Direct Publishing and self-publishing and all of that. So I tried the traditional route and I got a number of rejections. And then I decided that I would try and kind of publish it myself. So I went through, like, I suppose, a vanity publisher in Australia, and I paid quite a bit to get it all done. And of course, they didn't proofread it properly or anything, so it was full of errors. They sent it across to me, and I had to pay to get it released from customs. And then I had this big box of books that I didn't know what to do with. So then I went round to the various bookshops in Dunedin and asked them if they'd like to take some copies. And most of them said no, except for 1 or 2 secondhand bookshops and the university bookstore here in Dunedin, who very kindly took 5 copies. But then they called me up a couple of months later and said, look, we've still got 3 left. Could you come and get them? And of course, the 2 people who bought them were people I knew, including my husband to be, Tim. I mean, we were colleagues at that stage. We hadn't actually even gotten together, but I told him that I'd written this book and it was in the local bookstore, and he didn't believe me, so he had to go and have a look to see what was there. He was like, it really is.
Oh,
so he bought it. Yeah, so that was sort of part of how we got together, really. So yeah, that wasn't a great success. But at least I'd written the book and I'd put it out there in the world. And then, so I started another Epic Fantasies of Story, and also in the meantime, I started like a romance, a historical romance, although I wasn't sure what it was really at the time. And this was one that was set around, it was in Dark Ages England, it was 7th century Anglo-Saxon England, it was set around Sutton Hoo, you know, the burial site of the famous longship in England. There was a movie recently all about, you know, the dig, but it's called The Dig.
Movie.
Yeah, it's a really good movie there. But my story was about the history behind it. And so I sort of started to write the story, and it was really historically based. About the king who was buried there, but the romance was about his daughter and the son of his greatest enemy who'd come back to seek revenge. You know, so I got really taken up by the story, and I kind of was juggling both these. And then I realized that there was this thing called Kindle Direct Publishing, and I could start putting books up there. So I did. And back in those days, of course, you could put up like a book and it sold like 80 copies in like a couple of days because no one else was selling anything. So actually, my epic fantasy did actually sell a few copies, but then it sold nothing after that. But the romance, once I put it up there, and it did actually sell, and the comments also, the reviews were actually much better. So I kind of realized that perhaps I was better at writing this than I was at writing epic fantasy. And I'd also, and I spoke about this actually at the conference, but I think it's important to kind of also mention it here, is that when I put up Dark Under Cover of Night, which was the historical romance, I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't really understand about romance. And so I sent a review copy to a blogger who specifically reviews historical romance. And she got back to me and she was like, actually, I think you should actually just take it down from Amazon for a few days, make a few changes and put it back up, because it's not quite right. It's not a romance. It's too dark. And the story still is dark, to tell you the truth, but it at least now is a romance. So she had this list of things that I'd completely like overlooked that were specific to romance. And so, you know, like things like how you kind of, I had a happy ending, but, you know, it was quite gloomy, the story. There was a lot of fighting and arguing between the hero and heroine that didn't need to be there. Some of my descriptions weren't really romantic enough. So I went in and I changed all those things and I put it back up there, and I sent the revised copy back to her, and she gave me a really gracious review. So that got me thinking, though, that perhaps I needed to learn a bit about romance. So
you know what, I just want to point out here that it actually takes a lot of courage to actually accept that kind of feedback and work on it and make those changes. Like, it's not always that easy to do that. So you for actually doing that.
It's funny because you're right, it's not easy to take constructive criticism, especially over something that's creative. And I have to say that perhaps I am fortunate that I was working as a copywriter before I started publishing, and that helped me because I was already used to receiving feedback. Yes, it wasn't on my creative writing, but it was on my writing in general. I was working with this team of people that literally were doing web writing, and you'd have this team like critique all your work at the end of the week and pull it all to pieces. And that was actually really useful for me because it kind of toughened my skin up a little bit. And then I started working with my then boyfriend, now husband, Tim, who started to kind of casually edit my books initially. And I realized that he was not going to pull his punches. He was going to shoot from the hip. And he did. And so I developed a pretty thick skin there as well. So, but I do think it is something that is important, because sometimes we get so involved and so emotionally invested that it's actually really hard to take criticism. And you also have to be, I'm very careful. No one sees my books before they go to publication before Tim. I've never been part of like a critique group or anything. I've always been a little bit nervous of that. So I am aware that you give it to the wrong person and they could easily ruin your confidence. So I think, you should accept criticism, but also you need to always be aware that, you are the person who writes the book, therefore it's your word that goes in the end. I had a lot to learn in those early years. So that was about 2012, 13, when I published that first book. And then I started, I was still obviously working a day job at that time, and it was just more like hobby money for me because I wasn't earning that much at all at that point. And so I just wrote more in that world. So that was the Kingdom of the East Angles, the first 3 books, and then it was the Kingdom of Mercia, and then later it was the Kingdom of Northumbria. And they became, with each book, I kind of improved a lot of romance. I kind of brought more emotion into the stories. but I kind of realized that, of course, I was writing in an area where it isn't even like a category on Amazon. There is no Anglo-Saxon England category in the romance. So I found people who were maybe historical fiction readers, or people who were historical romance readers who were a little bit more adventurous. But generally in the beginning, you know, it was kind of, it put people off in a way, I think, because it's not an era that's that popular, because romance readers do like, you know, their Regencies, and they do like their medieval, and they know what they like, and they often don't veer from that that much. So it took me a while, to tell you the truth, to figure that out. It seems obvious now, but when I went to my first conference, which is Romance Writers of New Zealand in 2016, I had a bit of a mind-blowing experience, because A, there was all these people making a living at doing what I wanted to do, and B, I had a chat to one of the agents who was like, you know, why don't you write something in an era that sells better? And I was like, oh wow, that sounds revolutionary.
That's just crazy talk, that is.
Yeah, so but I still resisted it in a way, because I was like, okay, what if I wrote Scottish? But it would have to be Dark Ages, because that's my thing. So she was like, well, write Scottish anyway, because people love Scottish. So I wrote this new series set in 4th century Scotland, Isle of Skye, and that's the Warrior Brothers of Skye. And that series, it's so much better for me than the other ones, even though, you know, I still, you know, the other ones I love very much, but definitely just having it in Scotland already brought more readers in, made a huge difference. And then it kind of went, so my income at that point went to kind of from hobby to kind of almost part-time. But then, so I continued to write these Dark Ages Scottish books, and I wrote 2 series of those. In the meantime, I also wrote some epic fantasy romance, because I still love epic fantasy, and I thought, well, I'll put some romance with it. And those didn't really sell, because of course my readers were like, what's this? You write historical, what are you doing? But so I do have those books, and I enjoyed writing them. However, epic fantasy requires a huge amount of editing, you know, because they're big books and they're complex. But you know, it was a kind of a passion project on the side, and I've got them there. And people who read their way through my backlist, you know, often get to them eventually and think, oh, why not? I'll give them a go as well. So they're there at least. But yeah, I did realize that, you know, historical was where I needed to stay. But I also, at a certain point, realized that I also needed to perhaps think about writing more to market, because I saw that although I was writing in Scotland, I wasn't writing about Highlanders, I wasn't writing about the type of stories that I noticed were selling very, very well. So in 2019, I published my first medieval series, Scottish series, which was The Brides of Skye, and that was the series that launched me into being a full-time author. And so I was able to give up the day job. Not that I hated the day job, but it was kind of boring compared to writing books. And since then, that's what I've primarily focused on. However, having said that, I still do, I've got my line of Dark Ages Scottish that I still do. And I still, obviously I do my medieval, but some of my medieval also have like a little fantasy element in them as well, just to keep me on my toes. But I do the very much to market ones as well. So yeah, that is my story, really. I've tried to give you the right Reader's Digest version, so otherwise I'd be here all week. But yeah,
that's awesome. I love the progression, right? Like, and I think that's what all of us do. We learn as we go, and you figure something out, and we do that. So
I think it's better for the journey, isn't it? If you're learning it on the way, if you just dive straight in and you've been told to do this and do that, but you've got to where you are now because you've sort of had things that have shoved you on that way. And I think that's great.
And I think too, when you begin in the early stages of self-publishing, there wasn't all the knowledge, the pressure that there is now. Now, of course, you put high expectations on yourself if you're launching your first series, for example, because you're like, you know, I've got all this knowledge, there's all these courses out there. Whereas back in 2012-13, there wasn't really. So you could kind of be there making all these mistakes and no one was really noticing, and and you could kind of learn as you went. So
learning on the job.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So you do a few things differently to how the common idea of what we're supposed to do as indie authors. So I'd love to talk through some of those. And the first one would be that you have a really interesting writing process. So could you talk us a little bit through that and how that all works?
Yeah, I don't know. It's something that's kind of developed with the years, because I've tried lots of different approaches. I've read so many books on writing and on planning, and I couldn't decide whether I was more of a plotter or a pantster. So I then realized that I'm kind of in the middle. I'm sort of partly discovery writer, partly outliner. So I tend to outline quite vaguely, and just to give myself an idea about the characters, what they want, where they're headed, what the turning points will be, those type of things. So I know when I sit down to write, I've got them, and that speeds me up a little bit. But I leave it quite loose because the characters really kind of take control at a certain point of the story, and so I have to let them do that. It doesn't mean, of course, editing-wise, that there's more edits to do afterwards, but I prefer to do it that way. So that part of my process isn't that different from a lot of people. But I discovered too that I aim for 6 books a year, which sounds like a lot to some people. It sounds like not many at all to a lot of others. It really just means, but to do 6 books a year, I realized that I couldn't just kind of write books back to back. And I couldn't just be writing all the time, because some people do. And of course, you end up with carpal tunnel syndrome and things like that. And you've got to be seen, as a writer, you've got to really look after your wrists. And also, I also didn't want to lose that creative spark, because if you're writing all the time, that might happen. And I was just wary of that. So I came up with this idea that I would have a writing month and a non-writing month. So for example, we're in the beginning of September now, and this is my writing month. So I've now started a fresh book, and I'm really energized and enthused, and last month was my non-writing month, which meant that I was doing heavy edits on my next book that's coming out, because doing heavy edits and writing at the same time don't tend to mix for me. And then I was planning some books and doing some admin-y things, and actually, ironically, it's happened that my non-writing months have started to become busier, and actually, in fact, more tiring than my writing months, because my writing months are actually, I just write and I don't really do much else. And also the writing process, of course, you get into that like flow state where it's creative. It doesn't feel like work. You feel kind of energized after you're finished, because it's the editing for me that's more exhausting. So ironically, those writing months are actually, I really look forward to those, because they're like my freedom. But yeah, doing that has been worked really well for me. And really, I do try not to do any creative writing at all. Occasionally, something sneaks in, but I try not to. And that has been great, because it means I really look forward to the months in which I'm writing. And doing this, I publish a book every 2 months. So if I'm writing, for example, I write a book in November, that book will be published at the end of January, is how I tend to work. So then December will be editing the book that I've just written in November. My books are about 70 to 80,000 words, and I tend to write only in the mornings. 4,000 words I try to aim for, and if I'm having a really slow morning and I don't, then I have to write in the afternoon after lunch. But generally, I try and get 4,000 words written 5 days a week. I don't write at the weekend, and so my maths is rubbish, but that's about 20,000 words a week. Which meant that, in 4 weeks, it would be 80,000. Like I said, but they're often a little bit less than 80,000. So that means about 3 weeks and a half. And then I have those other remainder days to do what I call like a big read through before it goes to my husband, Tim, for the first edit. So that's my process, which is a little bit different to, I suppose, some people's. I have like quite a measured kind of marathon kind of rather than sprint approach, so that I don't end up at the end of the year exhausted, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it is, it was different in that it's not every day, you hear that common kind of, you must write every day to, I don't know, keep the muscle going. So I really like that idea of you writing one on, one off. I thought that was a really neat way of
I think it's nice because it means that you get to the point where it's you really, I could write all the time, but I know that could possibly also kind of drain me. So it means that when I do come to write, I'm like, really, you just can't stop me.
That's
Get out of my way, I've got to write.
Yeah, it's very inspiring.
Yeah, that is awesome. And then your husband Tim is your editor,
Yes.
so you don't send it out to anyone else, you use him.
No.
Does he have another job, or is he working full-time as your editor?
He was working full-time at another job when we met, and then he ended up leaving his job and came to work with me with the copywriting, web writing business. So we were doing that together. And then when I was writing the books part-time, he was editing the books as well, but he was also doing day job, and so he would often take on the work in the afternoon so that I could write afternoons. So initially, although I write mornings now, and I've discovered that mornings are better for me, for many years I wrote my books between 2 and 5 p.m. every day, and he would do the web writing work to so that I could do that. So, and then as the books did better and better and better, he's just become more and more. So he really is now my full-time editor, and I keep him really busy. And it's only 6 books a year, but I keep him incredibly busy. So it was an interesting fit because, you know, it's not an easy thing to work with a spouse or a family member with a relationship like an editor-writer relationship, because you know, once again, you run the risk, for example, they'll be too easy on you, or they'll love everything you write, and that's not what you want. You want someone who's going to be quite critical. Tim has a more analytical brain than me, which works really well for editing. And it was interesting because the first book I gave him to edit, I was a bit nervous about it, to tell you the truth. And then he came back with these comments, and I was like, my goodness, you're a natural at this. Like, you really are. You can see my vision. He's never ever tried to alter my writing style, and he's never tried to alter the way I tell stories, or he sees what I'm trying to achieve and he tries to help me get there, because sometimes as an author, after that first draft, you're too close to it, you can't see the glaring things that other people. So he's got a real knack for story. He really does. His background isn't in editing, but he was, you know, an arts graduate, and he's very much, you know, very, very literate and very analytical. And so we work really well together. Excellent team. And that's not to say that sometimes I don't want to strangle him when I write something. I'm like, yeah, this is the best thing I've ever written. And he says, no, sorry, this is going to need a lot of work. I'm like, no, what do you mean? But generally, actually, I've gotten to the point. Initially, I really used to resist the edits, because I was like, but why is it necessary? But actually, you know, as the years go on, I realized just how important they are. Editing is just such an important part of the process, and so I've actually started, dare I say it, to enjoy the editing, which I used to absolutely hate it. I used to dread it, but now I've changed my attitude towards it, and we do really work quite closely. So he has nothing to do with the stories until I hand them to him. So he doesn't, I plan them, I write them. I deliberately don't tell him really much about the story at all until it lands on his desk for that first structural edit.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm really jealous right now. That just sounds awesome.
It's unusual. There's not that many husband-wife kind of editor-writer teams like this. And like, and when he's doing the structural edit of my books, I literally cannot bear to look at him. I have to be in another room because I can't bear to see his face, because if he's like really po-faced, I'm like, oh dear, he hates that. And there was a few weeks ago, he was reading the last one, and I saw his mouth kind of curve until we smiled. I was like, yes, he likes it, and he did. But generally, it's too nerve-wracking for me. I can't bear it when he's doing that first read, because you're there watching, because you've been laboring over this thing for the last month, and you want him to like it. But it's a hard crowd.
So what is the editing process? Is it like a one and done, or are you kind of going backwards and forwards since he's literally in the next room kind of thing? How does it work for you guys?
Backwards and forwards. So we try to follow the more traditional process. So you've got the developmental edit first, then it comes back to me, and it stays with me for another couple of weeks while I do those. Then it goes back to him for like the line/copy edit, and then it comes back to me for some more wee changes, and then it goes back to him for the copy edit, then it comes back to me, and then it goes back to him for a proof, and then I proof as well. So it goes backwards and forth. And of course, he often, will wake up in the middle of the night with an idea for the story when he's in the middle of editing. And we have to go and write it on his phone, be like, no, actually this might work. So it's like a puzzle, when you're doing the editing. So but we try to follow that kind of traditional process, but of course, because he's in the same room as me or in the same house, it can be fluid too. But we've got definitely a process. So there's about six backwards and forths, I suppose.
And you're editing this, so you write the book in 1 month, and then you edit that same book the next month, so it's still
so it takes 2 months really to edit and 1 month to write, because you've got the heavy edits in that following month, and then you've got the proofing and things like that, and then of course it goes out to ARC readers about 10 days before release. So it's about a month and a half, I suppose, the editing process. So the editing process takes longer than it does to write the book.
Yeah, it's interesting, eh? And is there anything else that you do with editing that we should know?
No, that's probably it.
Do you have anybody else that's a proofreader at that stage? You guys have seen it a lot, you know.
We have seen it a lot, and that's probably the only time we've actually thought about outsourcing was actually for proofing. But we've kind of got a good system going now where use Grammarly and kind of dabbled a bit with Pro Writing Aid as well. That helps, but also we do the final proofs on the Kindle, so that I get my Kindle and I read. And he does this too. You read on Kindle, and I make notes on the actual Kindle, and that because I'm seeing it on a completely new device, and he is as well. That so that tends to be fairly clean. But I'd say if I was ever going to hire somebody, it would be actually to do the final proof for us, because there will be one or two things. Although having said that, Grammarly has been a massive help. And Tim has this piece of code, I don't know where he found it, where it's like Notepad Plus or something, where you run it through your document, or you run the document through it, and it picks up things like quotes, unclosed quote marks, things like that, which is pretty cool. So because of course you miss that, even proofreaders miss that, you know. And he's such a nerd about these things, because he picks up about half a dozen, and he's like, yes, he loves to run this through. So I let him do all that stuff, because quite frankly, it's not that interesting to me. But it is important.
You're done by then.
I was like, I don't want to see that book anymore.
No. Well, when you get to the point of the last pass of editing, I don't know whether I think it's just rubbish. I got to the point where you do, don't you? You just I've seen it so much that I lose that excitement that I had for it. I've lost it, and it's only when the first reviews come in that are good, hopefully, where I'm like, oh, phew.
Same. I'm exactly the same.
It's the same, isn't it? You're just oversaturated by it.
Oh. And then you're neurotic because you got it up there, and you're like, why have I put this book up? It's the worst book ever written. A review comes in, and you go, oh, maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe it's not complete pants. I have that feeling every single time.
Oh, good. I'm glad I'm not alone.
Yeah, well, that's so funny. So you also do your own covers, which is fascinating.
I'm very DIY, aren't I?
Yes, you are. It's awesome. So how did that come about? Like, what made you decide to try and do them yourself rather than outsourcing? And I mean, they're beautiful covers. I'm actually quite impressed that you're the one doing them. But
well, thank you. I'm glad you like them. I started designing my own covers mainly because I liked, sounds terrible, I like to be in control of the cover design process. Because what happened was, initially I hired this lady on Fiverr, a lady called Vicky, who was actually, she did amazing covers for me. But I noticed that I was literally sending her a mock-up of what I wanted, and she just had to follow it, because I already had a vision in my mind of what I wanted. So it wasn't one of these authors who says, gives you a vague idea, and then I let them have their creative freedom, which is actually what a designer prefers, to tell you the truth, and what they really should have. Because having this person hovering over you, being very prescriptive, is actually not very creative. It's not, doesn't allow you to do your best work. So I realized that about myself, and I was like, well, if I'm so controlling about this, why don't I actually design my own covers? And I've always been quite arty, and I like designing and painting and drawing and stuff. So for me, it's another creative outlet, to tell you the truth. So I started off using, I think, Word, it didn't work all that well, to create covers, because you could actually do that initially, but for the resolution, it wasn't great. And then there was like this online tool that I used, but that wasn't, it used to crash all the time, but it was like a simple version of like Photoshop. And then I thought, this is just not working. So I went and got myself Photoshop Elements, and then had to teach myself how to use it, and then it nearly burst out in tears the first few days, because I don't know how to use this, it's too difficult. So it took me like 2 weeks to make my first very rudimentary cover, learning how and I mean, Photoshop Elements is quite simple compared to the main Photoshop, but so I taught myself on there, and I studied all the covers in my genre a lot, and I also did, there's quite a few like free courses and also quite cheap paid courses on cover design and things like that. So I did a few of them, and learned how important, for example, fonts are. I never realized. I learned that simpler is actually often better. I learned about contrasting complementary colors and that kind of thing. So for me, it's a really fun outlet. I really enjoy it. I enjoy looking for the pictures on Shutterstock, where I buy most of my photos.
That's always a quick job.
Yeah. How many hours do you spend on there?
Too
Wow.
many, too many,
Yeah.
too many. But yeah, I really enjoy designing the covers, and it does mean, because I do my own, that I can, change them. I've just done that recently with a series. I'd done in fact, the series I'm working on at the moment, I've done 3 covers which were quite nice and pretty, but I just felt they weren't kind of hitting the mood of the book properly. So I've swapped them out with 3 other more kind of slightly more macho kind of covers, and they're actually, I think, converting a little bit better. So, but I can do that because I designed them, so it's much easier and faster and cheaper to do it that way. But yeah, I really adore cover design. I really love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it also allows you to do other branding content for yourself as well, obviously, too. Like
I do. Yes.
So you do like things like your Facebook header and things like that. Like, what else do you do?
Yeah, so I do it all. So I use Canva for some of that, and I also use Photoshop Elements for a lot of them. And because I do the covers, you're right, I can do all the branding. I can make it all across like for my website and social media and my newsletter and everything. It's all branded the same, and I can use the same images and the same fonts, which of course you can hire a designer to do that, but it can get quite expensive. And yeah, Canva's been great. I do love Canva. So I use that quite a lot for a lot of graphics and things. But yeah, it has allowed, I think, my ability to be able to do covers has actually allowed me to also think about, my all my graphics across and my branding, because I also worked as a web writer and marketing writer. That actually really helped. That job, I did it for a few years before becoming a full-time author, and it actually has really helped for the marketing of my own writer business. So things like the type of language that you use on your marketing material, and use things like taglines and writing blurbs and things like that. Writing blurbs is never easy, even if you have a background in marketing, but it definitely helps.
Yeah.
So all of that has helped.
Yeah, I imagine that would be that, because in terms of marketing, you have to think about the audience and what they're wanting, and I guess that's what you have to do as you're doing all your marketing for the as an author.
Absolutely,
yeah, totally. Okay, and so your niche is really interesting to me as well. So you've got this. So you talked at conference about how it's not necessarily just a particular era of Scottish, but you're trying to focus as a Scottish genre. I don't know. I'm not. Could you explain it? You explained it really well.
Well, I'll try do my best. So the Highlander subgenre of historical romance, it's kind of, the time period is quite fluid for it, because it's anything from beginning of the medieval period right through to like Jacobite, is kind of Highlander. So there's quite a range of books within that, and they're all considered to be Highlander. Of course, you've got the brawny man in a kilt, kind of image. Of course, I'm quite a stickler for historical detail, so none of my men in any of my books wear kilts, none of them, because all my stories are not set in the Jacobite era; they're set earlier. So, so I've set quite a few in 13th century, 14th, early 14th, mid 14th, and early 15th century, and they're all considered to be Highlander. And it is quite a niche genre. It's very popular. Readers really enjoy that particular niche, but we all take it, different takes on it. We're all quite different in the way we approach it, all the different writers. Some people, for example, use quite a bit of vernacular, whereas I don't tend to. For me personally, I find it a little bit distracting, so I make concession that I do ye and year, and that's it. There's no dinner ken or anything like that. And that's a personal decision for me, because as I decided that I would write the sort of books that I like to read, and I thought, for me as a reader, I find that distracting. So I decided that I would take a kind of middle of the road. I'd give it a slight Scottish flavour, but I wouldn't go too far down that road. And my Dark Ages Scottish ones don't have any ye or year at all. They're written just with you and your, because of course in that period of, they weren't speaking English, and they weren't speaking, they were speaking Gaelic, and very old versions of Gaelic. Obviously they weren't even speaking Gaelic at all back in the Pictish era. So there isn't it all, and because I have a background in history and language and stuff, and so it just that sort of thing bugs me slightly. So
that's actually just, can we take a side note, because I really wanted you. Did you have so you talk about this background in history, so you knew a lot about Scottish history prior to starting these books, is that yeah
so I I went to university here in Dunedin at the University of Otago, and I did like a degree in history and English, but then I ended up majoring in English and doing an honours degree in English, and I specialised in the old, so Chaucer and Beowulf, Old English, Middle English. So I've always really loved the ancient history. I've always loved Roman history, for example, as well. And Roman Britain is something that I love very much, and I want to do next year. I'd like to do a series set in Roman Scotland. I've done 1 or 2 stories set around that era as well. So it is, I've definitely tried to incorporate my loves of history into my work.
Yeah, I think you'd have to, it makes a lot of sense to me that you'd have to really love the eras and the history angle of it to be able to write, say, Scottish history well, I would have thought. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't enjoy history, it is difficult, I think, to write in those genres, because then when history just becomes window dressing, it doesn't become actually a real part of the story, and part of the world building is the history and kind of be creating that real taking them there to that period. And so I would have loved to be able to get into a TARDIS and time travel and go back in time to these eras. I would have loved that. Not that I want to have lived particularly.
No, and I don't want anyone to see me, and I don't want to smell it or anything like that.
No,
I'd love to go back.
No, exactly.
And just have a look. Yeah.
Yes, I'd love to. Yeah. So it's my way of time traveling. I get to take myself there.
Yeah.
I think a lot of authors who write historical romance, that's one of the draw cards is being able to kind of vicariously go back into the past and discover it. And so the research is a fun part of that.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And is that in Scottish historical fiction, are most of them people who are writing kind of historically accurate, or is it some of it's not so accurate?
It's a mix. It's a mix because it depends there is a lot of readers out there who just want it to be set in Scotland, and unfortunately don't really mind if it's that historically accurate. But there are also a lot of readers who really, really appreciate historical accuracy. But so there are some authors who write more of a Disney-esque kind of version of Scotland, and there are some that go for more grit. And I think so there is quite a range within my subgenre. We really we're all quite different. I'm quite different, I think, to some of the others as well. Most of my fellow Scottish romance writers are American. There's 1 or 2 British, I think 1 Australian that I know of, and there's me. But so, and I think, of course, coming from different cultures, we bring a different view of history, and so I think that influences the way we write Scottish history as well. I live obviously in Dunedin, which has a huge Scottish influence, and so I've always been very comfortable and with Scottish history and the way the Scots are. So I've always felt very comfortable writing about them. But I think there is a bit of a range within the genre for the type of historical accuracy, because, like I said, some readers just don't really mind. They just want their kind of Braveheart version of history. Some people actually want it, a little bit grittier, a little bit more accurate.
I think so any historical genre is like that too, isn't it? I mean, even when I write in, you can get the ones that are really stringent on getting things right, and then the looser versions.
I think you almost have to decide who you're going after as an author before you write. Like, do you want those people? Are you going to be a stickler for the history, or are you looking for people who just want that experience? And so, are there any other sort of, I don't know, common traits among readers of historical Scottish fiction?
Just trying to think. I think the demographic has been, although it's changing slightly, but it's older. I noticed when I looked at my kind of Facebook stats, I saw that most of my readers are age 65 and older, and largely female. So I think there seems to be a slightly older demographic. Having said that, I have noticed 1 or 2 younger readers as well. So, but definitely, most of my readers are in the US. Once again, I can see the stats from Amazon. I think it's like 65% US, and then 18% UK, and then 5% Canada, 5% Australia, and then the rest of the world. I think so. Yeah, most of my readers are based in the US. So that's and a lot of my readers are like retired school teachers, those type of jobs. They love history, and but I think you're right. I think you kind of have to think about the sort of reader you're going after. So my type of reader is a reader who likes a bit of real history, who likes to feel like they're going back in time, that there's a little bit of grit. If you like a more flowery style, you possibly wouldn't like my book so much. But I think it's important to have quite a distinct voice and tone, because you can't be for everybody.
No.
Because otherwise you become bland, don't you?
You've got to pick a lane right off, I think.
And that's really okay. It's not, you shouldn't be trying to. And that's an important part of it, knowing who your audience is and what they want from you. So that's really cool. I mean, I wasn't meaning that there should be any one way. I was just curious.
No. Good question.
And so the other interesting thing about you is that you don't tend to do much advertising, which was quite interesting to all of us. So can you talk to us a little bit about what kind of promotion you do, and then kind of talk about that sort of the advertising angle as well?
Yeah, advertising is a funny thing, because it can be like this big vortex that sucks you into it, and it can also be like a hemorrhager of money. So you have to. I'm not against advertising at all. And when Amazon ads first came out, for example, I utilised them quite effectively, actually, especially for box sets. They did very well because I got quite a high return on investment with those. But as especially my subgenre seemed to get more and more crowded and more competitive, and the clicks went up, I just found that when I was running Amazon ads, and I've got a few, but they just paused at the moment because they just weren't doing much. And it wasn't, the book was doing, I only tend to advertise my books that are doing the best anyway. I don't, the ones that are not doing so well, I don't advertise those. I just advertise now the ones that are already performing. So theoretically, if they're already performing, then the ads should kind of boost them a bit, but they just didn't seem to. So I was like, you know what, I'll just like leave that. So that's kind of how that happened. And then with Facebook ads, generally with Scottish historical romance, there aren't a lot of the authors are not even doing Facebook ads. So I think, although it's weird because a lot of our demographic is actually on Facebook, and I utilize my Facebook page a lot to be in contact with my readers, but the ads. So what I've tended to do is I've kind of boosted Facebook posts, and that's kind of cheaper, easier as well, and that's actually been quite successful in, especially with new releases or pre-orders, for getting kind of advance pre-orders, and also just letting people know that my book's out there. So that's worked quite well. That's very low-key form of advertising. I have been fortunate enough to get the odd book bub, which you never know, whether you'll get one or not, but I have, and that has been very helpful to me. But so I would say, but apart from that, I don't do a lot of advertising. So I would say the thing that's been valuable to me is consistency. So my readers really know more or less when my releases are going to be coming out, and that's important, because then they know, and they can pre-order, or they know to look for a new book from me. I don't just throw a book out there and then disappear. Like they know, and I keep in contact with them quite regularly. My newsletter has been a massive thing for me. I don't have a huge newsletter. I only have like 2,500 people on it, but it's a very active newsletter, and I send about 2 newsletters a month out. I used to send once a month, and then I was like, you know what, I'm going to send it because I've got more to say. So I'll send out more, because initially I struggled to know what to put in this bloody thing. I was like, oh God, I don't know.
I think everybody's been there, so there'll be a lot of people nodding in agreement.
Yeah, really, it's like, it's been
the irony is immediately I'm like, oh my God, all the historical stuff, people would be
exactly. And then I was like, why don't I start doing that? So that's what I started doing, is putting in did you know, that type of thing, and little snippets. And also you have teasers and stuff of upcoming books, but there's a lot of historical stuff that's actually really interesting. So I started sharing more of that sort of thing, and I'm in a group with other Scottish historical authors that we share each other's new releases when they come out, because we're a reasonably small group. It doesn't inundate the list. So and I just pop them at the bottom of my newsletter. But yeah, so the newsletter has been a huge thing for me. And I notice when I put up a pre-order or I do a new release and I send a newsletter out, that, you know, sales definitely spike. So that's definitely something that's a huge thing for me. And I think that consistency, you do utilize, like I said, Facebook quite a bit, my Facebook page. I mean, I only have like 400 people following me there, but like officially following me, you do the follow or like thing, but I get a lot of traffic and a lot of engagement. So I think that's actually been quite important for just keeping in contact. I think a couple of years ago, I decided that what I needed to do more was focus more on reader engagement rather than thinking about sales. And that was about 2 years ago. I made that decision, and I would focus more. Like I started doing little Facebook lives every Thursday morning. I just did one actually before I came online with you guys. And they're only about 15 minutes long, and they're just me burbling about, you know, what I did this last week with my writing, and I choose a little topic to talk about, and most of the people watch them actually after the fact, because, you know, being in New Zealand, it's always an anti-social time somewhere else in the world. But, you know, those I've been quite regular with them. I've been doing them, you know, every Thursday for the last 3 years, and that's been actually a really nice thing, because then people see me and they hear my voice and they hear what I'm talking talking about, and that's been, so I think it's those type of things have actually helped my profile, I think. And of course,
do you have a reader group at all? Or
I do. It's not a very big one. It's about 177 people, and I've been trying to actually get more engagement in that one, because they're quite a shy bunch. They don't really spontaneously engage.
Yeah, it's very hard, isn't it, to just, unless they don't start interacting with each other.
No, it's like, go on, don't be shy.
Chat.
Yeah, because they're kind of like the older ladies too, a lot of them. And so but I have started, there was actually one of the talks at the conference was on that, and so I was like, you know, okay, I'm going to start scheduling more kind of more engaging posts, and it actually has made a difference. They have started kind of chatting a little bit more, but it is harder work. But definitely the group's actually quite important. I put teasers and stuff on there that other people and cover reveals that the main page doesn't see. And any freebies, for example, say I write like a free short story that goes out to my list, also goes to the people in my group as well, readers group. So I have really focused on reader engagement over the last 2 years, and you know, and the newsletter was probably the biggest vehicle for that. And I think so that's why I think I always tend to have something on pre-order. So although I'm in KU, I still use, because a lot of KU authors don't use pre-orders that much, but I do. I love them. I wouldn't be without pre-orders, and they're actually often a good way to gauge also the popularity of a coming series. So because I've always got something on pre-order, that also helps, you know. With
how long do you run them for, if you don't mind interrupting you? I'm just curious.
It depends, but usually 2 months, 3 months at the most. Sometimes though, I mean, I've been tempted to run them longer, and one that I did run longer didn't actually do much. It seemed to tend to pick up steam kind of closer to the, so about 2 months tends to be 2.5 months maybe. But there's always something on pre-order. So
that,
you know what's
that
coming.
You can just put that link in the back of the last book.
Exactly, that makes such a difference. And when you've got a new release, when you've got that new release, it's just so important, because then in your back matter it's there, and then they're like, oh, click, you know.
Yeah, so because they loved it so much. When's the next one? Bang, I'm in. Yes,
they're on that high, and so
that's the time to get them, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
really.
How
long are your series? Are they?
They're trilogies.
Okay.
That's interesting.
That's another unusual, or slightly unusual aspect, because again, that conventional wisdom, you know, just keep writing the one series ad infinitum, you know. Have them all cousins, etc.
I'm a bit different, aren't I?
No, that's good.
I think a lot of writers are actually. If you speak to them, they'll all do something different, won't they? You know?
Yeah, no. But the thing is, I think I chose trilogies because I thought, if it goes really well, I can always just do another trilogy and interlink it. So that I've given myself an out. So an out in case, for example, say I start writing this trilogy and it fizzes, then I can gracefully bow out after 3 books. Or if I lose the love for it, which has never really happened, but you know, just in case, I've got like that out. But also for readers, it means, for example, I mean, my Anglo-Saxon England books, there's 9 books, and it could be read as a 9-book series if you wanted, but you can also jump in and out of it at different points. So it's kind of getting the best of both worlds, because it also is easier to, I have discovered for me personally, that it's easier to market a trilogy than it is a longer series. And when you do things like book bubs, you get better read through, because people are like, oh, it's only for a trilogy, I'll buy the whole thing. Whereas, oh, it's 12 books. Oh no, I won't. You know, I'll buy the first couple, but you know, it's a huge ask. And that's why often people, when they do book bubs with the longer series, they try and do a book bub for a book in the middle of the series, because they're trying to get that read through. So it helps with read through hugely, the trilogies that I write in, and I also, it allows me to do a big overarching story for the whole trilogy that's kind of behind the scenes, which helps massively with read through. So you've got that slight cliffhanger effect at the end of book 1 and book 2, not to do with the romance, because each romance is standalone and happy ever after, but there's a background story happening that has not been resolved and won't be resolved at the end of book 3. And that, do you weave characters through each of your series because they're set in the same time? They're the ones that are, so these characters will come across to this series, which will come across, Yes, readers love that. They do, don't they? They love it if you drop a character in at the end of like one series and make them really cool. And they're like, I hope that person's getting their own. So and old characters coming back too. They love to see them again. You know, like like a wee cameo appearance. No, they really do, don't they? They love that. And I think I think all the genres, but historical readers really seem to love that. And families, they really love families. Very much so. Yeah. So. Yeah, that's worked really well for me, the trilogies. And I, like I said, if I've found a series, for example, one that I wrote at the start of this year, Stolen Highland Hearts, has done incredibly well for me. And so I'm doing a follow-up series with the same branding, same sort of covers as that's going at the beginning of next year, and it'll just interlink. So literally you could read it as a 6-book, or you could read it as a trilogy, as 2 trilogies. So yeah.
And do you put those 3 books in box sets then?
Yes, I do.
How far down the track would you do that?
I've been putting them a little bit too early, and I actually think that I was like putting like 6 months, but actually I think you should almost wait like a year, to tell you the truth, because I noticed, not that it cannibalizes, because it doesn't. What happens is if you put out a box set too soon, it just doesn't really do much. It just sits there languishing, because the other books are still considered your front list, so they're still selling individually, and people are ignoring the box set. But usually what happens, about a year after release, people start looking for the box set. It must be because they kind of consider it to be backlist, and then all of a sudden the box sets seem to sell better than the individuals of those older series. So the older a series gets, the better those box sets sell. Absolutely. So that's so I like I said, I was putting it up about 5 months, 6 months after, but actually I've decided I'm going to actually push it back, because it's not that it harms me, because it doesn't do anything, but it's a bit pointless, because it just sits there, doesn't really do
another
anything.
Product later on, which will give those books another boost.
Yes, but I'm a big fan of box sets, and that's been, I think, a huge thing for my backlist selling.
Have you always been exclusive to Amazon, or are you thinking about, have you been wide? Are you thinking about wide?
I have dabbled in wide, definitely, and in fact I've actually just taken those 9 Anglo-Saxon England books out of KU, because they're my backlist, and they've been doing pretty well in KU, because of course the box sets sell quite well and they do quite well in KU. But I was like, you know what, I've got a large backlist now. I've written over 35 books, published over 35 books, so I can kind of play around a little bit with it. Yeah. When you've got because KU has done very well for me, and I'm really appreciative of KU, because it does bring in a large bulk of my income. But I thought, you know what, I really do want to experiment. So I took those books out, I put them wide. My goodness, it was a big job. Oh dear. That's probably why I'm tired, because I spent a lot of my down months in June and then August putting all these books wide, and having, the EPUB and having, and then I put the box sets wide. So I said, they're all wide now. And initially, when I put the first series up in May, there was like nothing. It didn't sell a bean. I was like, is it broken? Do I need to go and like buy a coffee to see if it actually works? I was like, oh no. So then I was like, no, don't panic. So I put them all up, and then I did book 1, which is Dark Undercover of Night. I put that as perma-free, and I've noticed it's actually things have started to move now. And so I've started to serve that. And that's really lovely to see, because those 9 books are like, years old now. So it's great to see them, selling. And so I think that's possibly what I'll do is when books become really quite an old backlist, I'll shift them across. I don't know whether you guys do something similar.
I just put all of my contemporaries wide, just
Me
under
too.
another name, just to
So they're
see.
just going over now.
Just to see,
Yeah.
they're not my big sellers, the historicals are. So I thought, well, why not? Just go there. And the same thing happened first few weeks. I'm just like, I wonder if I've done that wrong. No sales at all. What's going on? How is that possible? But they just started to move. Yeah, it's broken. Yeah. So they just started to move. So that's something at least.
Yeah. I think you do have to be patient with wide. And I think I'd done a bit of research and saw that, if you have a permafread, it seems permafread doesn't really work so well on Amazon anymore, possibly because of the KU. But definitely on wide, it made a huge difference. So so I think it's nice to kind of spread things around a little bit. And so I, for my front list, I would definitely keep them in KU because that's where a bulk of my readers are. But once something becomes quite an old backlist series, you're not really losing anything. And I've noticed my those books obviously are still on Amazon, and although they're not getting reads anymore, the sales, of course, have gone up. Have bumped up the individual unit sales.
I've noticed that too.
Yeah. Have you noticed that as well? And actually, you get paid better for them anyway. So.
Different readership. It's a different readership, but it is. I mean, I think it's been the case since there were two options, if you like. Whether you go Amazon exclusive or publishing wide across all the retailers, that it is a slower build wide. But it's
worth putting the effort in.
I think it is
a matter of kind of patience,
audience, isn't it? So
that's what's quite exciting, actually, having a fresh audience. And because those 9 books are actually they're quite historical, I think perhaps historical fiction is wide readers are possibly more into it,
and they probably don't mind paying more.
Yes, I've heard that too.
Little thing about if it's more, it's got to be better, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see where that leads. And so I've been doing a bit of that, and I have obviously I'm wide with my paperbacks using Ingram Spark for them, and then that's been ticking away nicely in the background as well. So paperback sales have definitely gone up the last couple of years as well. So Ingram Spark, although you don't get paid so much per book, it definitely kind of adds to the pot, so to speak. So
do you do KDP print as well?
I do, yeah. So I just don't click the expanded distribution, so that I just get both. I get the KDP print ones, and those sales have definitely gone up as well. I think during the pandemic, it's definitely increased. I think paperback sales for a lot of authors. People just don't want to be reading on screens.
What about audio and foreign rights? Have you tried any of that?
That's a good question, actually, Wendy, because I would love to, and I've actually looked into it. But it's with foreign rights. I was thinking about getting like a translator, and I looked into it, but it is very expensive. And the thing is that if you want to I really want to do a good job of the translations, because some of the books in my genre have been translated, and then when you go and have a look at their reviews on, say, the France site or German, the reviews are terrible, and it's like the star average is really low. And I think you're almost like, you'd be better to let those people read in English. This is just my opinion, and I know it's not everybody's, and that's fine. But my opinion is that you're actually hurting your brand. Because some of those people would prefer to read it in English if it's been written well, rather than a bad translation. And there's a translation. I used to work as a translator because I lived in Italy for years and stuff, and I know how hard it is. It's so hard. And so and I thought about maybe translating mine into Italian, but then realized no way. Way, it's too hard. So I looked into it, and it's something that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking perhaps that it might be a better idea to maybe to sell the rights, and get a publisher who then, because then they can really do it to the quality that it should be. So I'm thinking about that for the future. And for audio, being the DIY kind of person that I am, I thought I'd have a go at recording my own audio. So I did. I actually did there's like a voice coach, like she works with like actors and stuff here locally, and I did like about 4 sessions with her about a couple of years ago. And then I launched into, like, I narrated my novella and I put it up there, and actually it wasn't half bad. And then I've actually been narrating, I narrated book 1 in the series I did earlier in the year. I'm going to do book 2 and book 3, but after that I'm stopping because it's an experiment. I'm going to see whether or not the series, how it sells on audio, and if it sells well on audio, then I'll actually pay through Findaway Voices to get someone, or actually just pay a narrator. So what I've actually done with Highlander Deceived actually is I actually put it up through Findaway Voices, and it was accepted, and it's just been accepted by Audible as well, so it's now up on Amazon. So I was pretty excited because of course it's me doing the narration. And there's a fantastic book called Narrated by the Author. It's narrated by the author. I forget the name of the author itself. She's an Australian author. She's fantastic. And the book is like DIY kind of, or narrating your own audiobooks and putting them up there for dummies. It's wonderful. It's like step by step, narrated by the author. And so without her book, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And she, I use Audible, which is like Audacity, which is like a free software. And then it has like an ACX checker on it. And then there's another checker that you have to download called Second Opinion, which is free as well. And then if you run it through both of these, and there's like things that you have to weigh, you have to make sure that the head and the tails are long enough, all that kind of stuff. But if it passes those checks, I've discovered that when you put it onto Findaway and ACX, it passes, fingers crossed, because I also the novella passed as well. So, and like I said, I'm not a professional narrator. I do a straight read. I don't do voices or anything. I don't do accents. No way, that would be too painful. But yeah, my voice is quite a soft voice. It's kind of a neutral voice. So when you're listening to me, you kind of forget that I'm narrating it and you just focus on the story. So I think I've had quite a positive response, because I put chapter by chapter, actually, Highlander Deceived, to put it up on YouTube so that people could, and I'll take it down now that it's published elsewhere. But yeah, so that's been an experiment, but it's not something I could do long term because it takes a lot. It's not the narration that takes the time, it's all the mastering. It's the editing that takes the time, not even the mastering. So but once I finish that series, I will, if I see that it is actually selling a bit, I think I would then invest in paying a narrator.
Yeah,
I love your can-do attitude.
I
It's
know.
fabulous.
You're a Kiwi for
inspiring.
sure.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, no, I like to try these things also because I enjoy them as well. But also, you have to draw a line you have to realize, where your time is best spent. So, for example, no one else can write my books but me, but I could hire someone else to do some of that other stuff. And so I always have to keep that in mind, because you can easily get burned out, you can easily get like overwhelmed, and so I always have to remind myself, that I cannot do everything, but I can I can dabble.
And it gives you such a great insight, doesn't it, to see how the process is, see how it works, see how long things take, so that when you do hire somebody, you've got all that knowledge to fall back on.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You can, for example, with audio, I now know like what I would look for in a narrator. I realized that I probably want a female narrator, not a male narrator, and I don't want like a strong accent. I'd prefer to have someone with a more neutral accent, so, and I don't want voices or anything like that. I just want a really sort of a straight read. So that's, and I wouldn't have known those things if I hadn't done that myself. So that's actually, it is. It means, for example, like I said, with covers, if I was ever to hire out covers again, I know what works, what doesn't. So I do like to, well, it's one of the things I love about being a self-published author is that aspect. That's why I think I'm very well suited, my character type suited to this job, because obviously I love the stories, I love writing them, but I love everything else that goes with it as well, as you can probably tell.
That's cool.
That's great. That's fantastic.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
It's been amazing.
It's been awesome to talk to you. Do you have any last comments that you'd like to leave our listeners with before we close off the interview? Or just any pieces of advice?
I would say that one of the pieces of advice I think is important for me was, especially at the stage I'm at now, is to realize that when you're working as a self-published author, and if you're making like a full-time living, but even if you're working towards that, is to realize that it's not linear, that you don't have, that it's not just an upward, that sometimes you'll have a series that does very well and then things plateau or even go down and then it goes up again and then down, and that's perfectly normal. And that you always, one of the reasons why, like I said, I started doing my writing month and the non-writing month was that I kind of wanted to pace myself, but I think you have to do that also with your expectations as well. And I think that's important for your mental health as a writer, because, you know, it's so personal to us, and, you know, and also it's quite precarious, because, you know, your sales can go up and down month by month, and depending what's happening in the world, you know, that can alter it as well. And I think you kind of have to kind of, you know, decide what course you're charting and just stick to it, and kind of have the faith in your work, and know that you're writing the stories that you know that you want to write, that you're obviously you're focusing also on the market too, but you're also not, you know, you're not slavishly like jumping on the latest bandwagon and getting stressed because it worked for someone else but didn't work for you. And I think that stuff can be very distracting. And so yeah, that would be my piece of advice. It's like,
brilliant advice.
You know,
very good advice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us here today, Miss Farr.
My pleasure. I loved it. Love chatting to you guys. It was so much fun.
Awesome. Now, if someone wants to go and check out any of your books, where can they find you, Jayne?
At JayneCastel.com.
Awesome. And can you spell it out for me, because it's unusual spelling?
It is. So Jayne, so JayneCastel, so not Castle, Castel, .com.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us. And Shah, where can we be found?
So this is one you'll want to come to, because I've actually kept a note of all the different links that Jayne's talked about, and I'm going to put all of those links, including the Audacity and those kind of those ones as well. So come to spargirlspodcast.com and look at the show notes for the extra links there. Awesome.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For another episode of the Spar Girls podcast. We'll be back again next week with another episode. But for now, farewell.
Well,
farewell. Bye-bye.
Bye.